Chef Madden back again. Since we've gone through our bread techniques, we've done our quick bread techniques, now we're going to move on to some basic pastries. This is known as Pate Choux, or in English, a Choux paste. This is done with a variety of ingredients. If you've ever eaten an eclair, a cream puff, a profiterole, if you've ever seen those little swan desserts, and then even when the students today was saying, you know, is that similar to a churro? A lot of the recipes are very similar. The only difference with the churro that's deep fried instead of baked. So I'll explain some of the reasons how they work, why they're hollow inside as we go along. But want to get started with our ingredients. So what we're going to do, we have a cup of water and we have butter in with the water. So what we're going to do, we want that butter and water to melt. My portable burner will melt that very quickly. That's going to come to a boil. Once that comes to a boil, we got a cup of flour and 4 eggs. There's also a little bit of salt in here. So with the salt and the water, that'll get us boiling on the quicker side. I'd like to do this from an up camera angle at some point too, just so you get the perspective, but pretty much when your butter melts in, you'll see your butter melt in. The water's going to start to boil right away. Like I said, with the portable burner, even with the stoves we have, this should go pretty quickly. So, we're almost at a boil already. What's going to happen is, I already have my oven set. Most of your recipes will say 400 degrees for your oven. We're using our convection oven, which has fan and air it'll push air around in the oven. We'll generally set the oven a little bit lower, because if it's 400, they'll tend to burn before it gets to where we need. So as you can hear, our water's getting there. So you want to bring it to a full rolling boil. So we'll need a minute or two, and then what this is going to do, we're going to just slightly take it off the heat. We're going to add our flour. So if you add your flour while it's on the heat, you tend to get clumps of flour. We're going to just take it off the heat for a brief minute. So as you can hear, we're up to that boil. I'm going to turn it off. So this will cool down very quickly. This would simulate taking it off the heat if we're in the stove. And again, you're going to add all your flour in at once. And you want to mix it very quickly, making sure all the flour gets wet. If you have clumps that start to bake here, as you start to go to the next step, what's going to happen is the flour will just cook into almost like a little dumpling. So if you've had soup with dumplings in it, that's what will happen if you don't do this right. And that's one of the most important steps, because if you don't do this step right, when you try to add the eggs in, they won't add in. Your cream puff or eclair or whatever shape you're doing will not expand out, and then all of a sudden the butter will just actually separate out. So I'll have to say, this is, I'm saying basic pastry technique. This one's a little bit more advanced, but if you learn how to do it right the first time, it's pretty easy once you learn how to do it. So as I'm cooking this, once you get your flour in there, it cooks pretty quickly, and you know that it's getting done as it starts to cook together, and it'll come off the side of your cup. So I'll show you that in the video. I'll put my pan up to the screen, and you can kind of see what it looks like when it's done. So we're good here. As you can see, coming away from the side of the pan. And what I'll tell my students is it almost resembles mashed potatoes. So if you see where the butter's starting to separate out, that typically means that you didn't cook the flour in quick enough in the beginning. And then as you look, most recipes will tell you either continue to stir or set aside for a few minutes. Well, most of the times when we're doing this, we're doing a little bit larger quantity. So we will use the mixer. Today, I'm going to do it by hand and show you if you're doing it. This is a 4-egg version. When we're doing in class, we're generally doing a dozen eggs. I have had students do it by hand, but that works a little bit better in the mixer. When we're learning how to do it, Most of the stuff we're going to be doing is mixing it by hand, because if you over mix it in the mixer, it's not going to turn out. So it'll tell you cool it down to about 125 degrees. So like I said, give it a few stirs. The main thing is you don't want to take it directly off the heat and throw an egg in there. Because if you take it directly off the heat and throw an egg in there, 9 out of 10 times you're going to get a scrambled egg. That's the second place where a lot of people have problems with this technique. So again, we do 1 egg at a time. And you're going to completely incorporate it before we move on to the next one. So it'll look almost like it's not mixing in at first. As it starts to warm up your egg incorporates in. So you could think of when we pop this into the oven, think about when you egg wash a roll. So egg washing that roll gives it that nice shine, that color. What's happening with this when we're making it, we had that initial paste, and then we're cooking, we're incorporating eggs into it, but the eggs are not cooking, we're just incorporating it. So what happens is with our bread and other stuff we worked on before, especially bread, you've learned that as the bread cooks, steam releases, and that's why we see, you know, the inside of bread, what it looks like. This is the opposite. Since we're putting 4 eggs in here, that's a decent amount of eggs. What is going to happen is your steam isn't going to release. So this has 2 cooking temperatures. Like I said, we're doing it in our convection oven. So we'll start on 375 and turn it down to 325. If you were cooking this at home, you would start on 400 and turn it down to 350. And the typical time, that initial cooking, is 5 minutes of that high heat. And what that does, it builds up all that steam inside of it, but with the egg, it has no place for the steam to release. So when it fills up with the steam, that's how you get that hollow effect in the middle. And that's what makes the pate choux different than a lot of the products we're doing. So again, you'll do 5 minutes on high heat. And you could tell almost by the size of them. In the one video that I have linked, it's a French chef, and he tells you it's very important at that point. You know, if your oven doesn't have a window, you'll have to figure it out as you go. So maybe the first time they don't turn out perfectly. If it has a window, you want to just look at the product through the window, because during that initial stage, if it's starting to rise and you open up the door of the oven, they'll sink. Once they sink, sometimes you can get them to rise a little bit up, but once they sink, you're not going to get the effect of the product you need. So this is one you got to be really patient, and kind of like I said, it's a little trial and error at home. I know having an electric oven at home where I used to live, making the pate choux, the first time I made them, was not really pleased with them. And then I kind of played with my oven, turned the temperature up a little bit in the beginning so they rose, because your gas and electric ovens will definitely have different effects when you're doing it. So kind of played around, like I said. First ones I made were okay. You know, they're the ones you bring to people that you don't like as much. And then the second time I made them was going to a dinner party. They turned out even better. And then every time you do them, you make them work a little bit better. So I have my last egg in there. Like I said, we're doing 1 at a time. As you can see, where it looked like mashed potatoes before, it's a little bit more runny. This you would want to bake right away. The only difference is, and they turn out okay, but they don't turn out perfectly. If you were to pipe these out, put them in the freezer, you could thaw them out and bake them. However, I've had students that tried to pipe them out, put them in the fridge, and bake them the next day. It doesn't work. So you either got to bake them right away or freeze them. The ideal goal is once you get them like this, pipe them out, bake them in the oven. So I'll be back for part 2.